past crises, this is a global crisis. And so all of the countries that you've referenced are in crisis, but so is the United States. And so is most of Europe, right? And so when your donor countries are also crisis countries, how does that affect your ability to fundraise? I mean, the idea of food security in this country has been something that Democrats and Republicans have. It's one of the few areas that Democrats and Republicans have been able to agree on in funding our role, and that's especially true with the WFP. How is your appeal going now that we have this kind of manifold crisis, both at home and abroad?
Yeah, you can imagine if your house is burning down, you're losing everything you've got, and somebody comes to you wants to help a neighbor a mile away, you're like, look, I want to help you, but I got to take care of my own family. So yeah, we're dealing with that. And let me say about the supply chain, and we'll come right back to this issue. World War II was a tough time for the world, but the supply chain didn't break down in World War II, except in war zones. You've got the supply chain right now breaking down all over the world, and the implications are just insurmountable. This is why we've got to be shrewd, smart, as to how we handle and respond to this COVID. It's been quite remarkable in the last 4 weeks. I had COVID. I was laid out for about 3 weeks, but I've been now for about a month. I've been sitting in front of this, MacBook or iPad or whatever it might be, doing just what we're doing with presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers all over the world. I've been in Washington, D.C., for the last 3 weeks, meeting with leaders face to face, actually, social distancing, of course, and because I'm probably the safest person to meet with right now. But here's what's really been interesting is, and a lot of people, read a lot of propaganda. United States has backed off of their multilateral commitment. I hear that all over the place in the last couple of years. But in fact, and this is not a political statement, but when I arrived at the World Food Program, and I was not a big UN person. I was kind of kicking and screaming coming into this role. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go work for the United Nations. I like to get things done, et cetera. And the World Food Program is a whole different ball game. I mean, they get it done, logistics. I mean, it's an amazing operation. So when I arrived, we were receiving the most money ever from the United States under the Obama administration, about $1.9 billion out of our less than $6 billion budget. Now, that was 3 years ago. Under the Trump administration now, with the Republicans and the Democrats working together, we've received for 2019 $3.4 billion from the United States, about 40% of our funding. In fact, the message that Trump and my Republican and Democrat friends gave to me 2 years ago is that we're not backing down. You go tell our allies like Germany, the UK, that, hey, step up too. Now, like you said, it's been really remarkable to see in Washington where the Republicans and the Democrats seem to go like this. The sun's shining, no, it's raining. It doesn't matter what it is they're fighting. But when it comes to food security and strategic international aid, it's been remarkable to see them coming together. In fact, everyone's concerned about food security. They know if there's destabilization to their neighbors, to the south, to the north, across the Atlantic, they know that means it's a national security interest to the American people. They understand that. And so we are very practical, very factual. Here's what's going to happen if we don't get these funds. Here's what's going to happen if there is destabilization. And so we are concerned, of course, because of you got to take care of your home first. We get that, of course. And the American taxpayers are very generous people. But I think there's no question in my mind we can do both. The United States is asking, what else do you need? Where do we need it strategically? Germany, the EU, the same thing. For example, if Sudan, before COVID, was at a magical crossroads, as you can imagine, if they didn't receive economic a program going forward with stimulus packages and safety net programs, you would have a complete destabilization and you would revert back to something much worse than you had before, which would create an incredible environment for extremist groups to destabilize the Horn and then, of course, mass migration into Europe for for economic destabilization there, as the goals of these extremist groups are. And so far, the leaders are expressing we want to help, we want to do everything we can, but so we'll see how it plays out. I'm asking leaders to prioritize. You don't have enough money to make everybody happy. I mean, right now it needs to be life and death commitments on funding, and not the frills and the things like that. It is a critical point in time right now, because what we're doing is analyzing out and evaluating what we consider to be the hot spots. For example, in Africa, where are the hot spots that you may have the worst scenario that could create destabilization to a government, a region, which can impact, global dynamics. And so anyway, let me throw it back to you, Cameron.
Well, let me pick up on this theme of instability, which you've raised a number of times. And we think of famine and food insecurity as an effect of conflict. You're also talking about famine and food insecurity as a new driver of conflict, is what it sounds like you're saying, by creating instability in countries. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that kind of circle, both as food as a driver of conflict, and then insecurity as a result of conflict, and how do you see these things linked?
It was interesting. We were able to get the United Nations Security Council, and like Democrats and Republicans are fighting over everything. In the Security Council, you got Russia and China over here, and you got everybody else over there, it seems like, and they're never agreeing on anything. We actually were able to bring everybody together on the Security Council last year to say very clearly that food security is vital to the peace and stability of nations around the world. That was a huge admission to what most people would think would be common sense. But I think we always took food for granted, and now we're beginning to realize its implication. And so what you can imagine, when you feed like we do 100 million people, if I fed your family in your neighborhood every day for a year, do you think I would know what's going on in your neighborhood? Oh, yeah. I can tell you what's going on in neighborhoods. And that reason I say that, because we survey millions of people all the time. Number one, by and large, and I mean vastly, people don't want to leave home. I don't care where they are. That's their home. You in North Carolina, I'm South Carolina, Damien was Charleston. We've got the flexibility to fly and go get a job over here, come back home, and that's the American way. But you still don't really want to leave home, your country. That's kind of the way it is. There are exceptions to that. But we find that people are no different anywhere else around the world. They don't want to leave home. But if they don't have food or some degree of peace, they will do what any of us would do to save our little girls, our little boys, our children. They will find it. But here's what's interesting. We did a lot of surveying during the Syrian conflict, and still are. We're feeding about 4.5 million people, and that's going to be bumped up to about 6.5 million people, because we can break that down too. But what we found in Syria, and this was reflective of other countries, people will move 2, 3, 4 times inside their country before they will finally leave. But when they don't have food nor security, they leave. Every 1% increase in food insecurity is a 2% increase in migration. Now, listen to this. If I feed a Syrian in Damascus, it's 50 cents a day. And that's almost double my normal rate, because it's a war zone and logistics are costlier in war zone. In fact, we spend about an extra $1 billion of increased costs just in conflict areas. Now, that same Syrian, if that Syrian decided I can't survive and I can't live, I can't get food nor security, and they leave, and they end up in Berlin or Brussels or London, the humanitarian package for support is 50 to 100 euros. So it costs literally 100 times more not to address root cause. So we've got the data with regards to what you're talking about. when food prices start spiking and food becomes a serious issue, theft, riots, protests, destabilization, and then if there's already political dynamics at work, you can imagine how that gets exploited. So,
well, let me pick up on that, because I think one of the interesting things about the crisis right now, when we think about WFP, I think there's a popular conception of WFP as operating in war zones, operating in refugee camp settings or
right.
IDP camp settings. But right now we're faced with a crisis where in world capitals and capitals all over the world, in very urban and peri-urban environments, you're faced with new famine and food insecurity. Does it change your calculus at all, or your way of doing business to provide services to people in those urban areas versus in a more rural setting or in a more conflict associated setting?
No, this urban issue is a very important issue because you would think it's normally rural, depressed areas, but this urbanization issue is a critical issue before COVID for a variety of different reasons. But COVID has compacted it because of supply chain. And so if people aren't getting their food and don't have a safety net program, wow, that is just a spark ready to go off right there. And a lot of people, I think, in Western countries are now beginning to appreciate what do you mean by this supply chain? And I think they're beginning to understand this. But in the United States, I mean, just this week, I was talking to leaders in Washington about supply chain breakdown, not just toilet paper and protein, but the issues you face when someone shuts a port down or distribution point just for a week. Holy mackerel, because the supply chain is so smooth. And you get in some of the countries that we're talking about, if that was the week that was when the only food that comes in for that month, and that's what you have a lot of places. It may be the only time that food's coming in for that month. And so you can imagine the implications that will have right there alone. And that is what we're dealing with. Yeah. And so a lot of the leaders are looking to us for guidance from our experience around the world. And we're there to do everything we can while we're continuing to deliver life-saving food, we've got about 35, 40 ships on the open seas right now. I don't know how many aircraft now. We were 100 before this. How many we're leasing by the day. And it's been wonderful to see a lot of the allies come together. I picked up the phone the other day and called Mohammed bin Zayed, the head of UAE, and he's just a great friend. And I said, brother, I need a 747, a 737, a C-130, and a hospital in Abu Dhabi. And he said, you got it. To get that kind of response. And when I talked to the friends in Washington, seeing the Republicans and Democrats, what do you need? What's it going to take? And trying to balance out between obviously protecting America first and helping on the supply chain, for other countries. Anyway, back to you, Cameron.
Thank you. I want to pick up on something you said earlier on in your comments. You've talked a lot about logistics, and I think anybody who's listened to us for the last 30 minutes understands now that WFP is really a logistics organization.
Right.
And I think what people don't realize is that you're not just a logistics organization for food, but you're moving everything that the UN does across the board, right? And so I wanted you to just unpack for us a little bit how you work with other UN agencies and partners within the UN system. So not just moving food, but moving medicine, PPE for WHO, moving things for UNICEF. Explain to us how you function as part of this broader family of UN agencies.
Yeah. When I arrived at the UN, I found there were a lot of people that like to just talk, sit around, just talk and talk and talk and talk. And that's just not my way. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it for a few minutes. Let's go get it done now. And so my goal, my goal, is to put the World Food Program out of business. I want an exit strategy in every country because we've been successful. We're no longer needed. Now, as to the logistics, because we are a get it done operation, we have goals, objectives, and we don't let things get in our way. We're always creative to figure out how we're going to get that food there, how we're going to get that medical supply in that particular area which has been restricted. So we've got that experience. Now we have collaborative teams working with UNICEF, UNHCR, IOM, WHO, especially WHO right now. And so we work these teams, and we have a very, very sophisticated computer system software integrated. And how do we get the best pricing, the best logistics coordination, and then, of course, moving the products. We're setting up, for example, now distribution points. We got major distribution points around the world already, but now we're setting up short-term distribution points near major medical suppliers, wherever they may be in the world. And so that's to allow us to move the cargo quickly and cheaper, so we can get it on the big 747s, take it, let's say, to Addis Ababa or Accra, and then break it down into the 737s, smaller aircraft. And so like when WHO, UNICEF, UNHCR says we need this, and because we buy so big and we can buy it cheaper and we can buy it faster, we have a lot of agencies that'll call us, and including countries, that'll call us, say, it'll take us 60 days to do this. It'll be too late. Can you do it now? And we're like, we got it. We'll take care of it. And so like hospitals, we're building hospitals. We're buying what we call temporary tents from a hall group out of Norway, Oslo. So we just had, I think, 4 flights, Gavin, 4 flights taking equipment for building the hospital in Accra, one in Addis Ababa right now. We're doing the landscaping as we speak with the bulldozers, and literally within 2.5 more weeks, it's ready to go. Now, WHO's got to get their equipment, their personnel in, but we're going to be ready to go. And that's how we operate. We'll build a hospital in about 3 weeks. We'll get that thing ready because it's critical, that's what we do.
Yeah. Let me ask you, we're about to start running short on time, and I wanted to ask you about some of your new lessons learned from this crisis. And one of the things that I've seen is some kind of creative responses from WFP in the recent months. You did it recently in Sudan, a wheat swap where you're able to purchase wheat for the government of Sudan, and then they can turn that into bread. They can distribute it. We've also seen increasing uses of direct cash transfers to people, so that they're not just lining up for food, but that they have some agency over their food purchases. Can you talk a little bit about how WFP is trying to incorporate some new ways of doing business to respond to the crisis right now?
Well, most people think we just bring in food, and that's not the case. In fact, if you bring in just food in the wrong context, you can collapse the market for all the other people in the region. And we've seen that happen. So we're very meticulous of our economic analysis to design the best modality. For example, and I could do dozens of examples, but we take food into Syria. In Lebanon, we bring in cash because the Syrian refugees, for example, that are in Lebanon, when I say cash, a credit card. So we've designed, not many people realize we're probably definitely the world's largest user of blockchain technologies with regards to the humanitarian world, but artificial intelligence, satellite imagery, the most sophisticated software operations you can find nowadays. And so in terms of cash-based transfers, we now do over $2 billion in cash-based transfers. So for example, in Lebanon, so we meet and work with, you can imagine the economic impact that 1 million refugees from Syria into a country as poor as Lebanon is right now, what that does, or in Jordan or wherever it might be. And so in Lebanon, we met with over 500 small mom and pop store owners and gave them the equipment so that the refugees could come in with the credit card. It might be $30 a month, but that keeps people alive. Well, multiply that times 1 million. You got $30 million now being circulated into the local economy, helping on pricing and fluidity, as I say, into the marketplace. in Yemen, if we can go from now, you got to make sure you can get the supplies in supply chain. That's critical. Is if we can get the food in, I mean, the commercial side can get the food in. Like in Yemen, if I can go to cash using biometrics, either finger or eye, knowing that it goes to the intended recipient, then I can absolutely take the exchange rate, which has been collapsing left and right in Yemen, and the food pricing, and bring it down, not just for my 12.5 million people that we feed in Yemen alone, but the other 16.5 million. I can drive the food prices down for them so that it helps the other 16.5 million. So we're using cash-based transfers where we can to stimulate market economic opportunity. And we're trying to buy more locally too, so that we can stimulate smallholder farmers. We're now buying about $1 billion worth of commodities and services and goods inside Africa now, stimulating the local economy, training smallholder farmers how to be sustainable, successful, doing what we need to do to create, my opinion, freedom and independence, so they don't need outside support. So we've got a lot of creative ways, swapping, doing the things. I don't let no be an answer. If I see something needs to be done, we're like, well, let's break that down and think about it. Next thing you know, you've got a hole for opportunity to do what you need to do.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We run out of our allotted time, but I have to say, Governor, in the face of such a terrifying and concerning crisis, this has been a really uplifting conversation to hear your enthusiasm for rising to this challenge, and you really are the best example of what Americans can do, especially in the UN system. It's a great honor to have you join us today. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Bronwyn Bruton, who is the director of the Africa Center here at the Atlantic Council. And just thank you one more time, Governor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for moderating that conversation. Governor, I'm not going to lie to you. That was a hard information to hear. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council for joining us today. We are deeply grateful to have this opportunity to amplify your message. And I know that I speak for every person who's watching and all of the people who will watch this conversation when I thank you and the frontline workers at WFP for the tremendous service that you are accomplishing. It is uplifting to hear the ingenuity and the energy that you are bringing to tackling this crisis.
No, thank you.
The last thing that I want to do, please, is to invite everyone who's watching now to join us for AC Front Page next week, when we will be hosting David Rubenstein, of the Carlisle Group. That will be Thursday, 12:30 Eastern Time. Again, Governor, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And please pray for our people out there that are putting their lives on the line every day, because they're dedicated. You remember Scott Pelley in 60 Minutes? We had done a big interview, and he was so moved at the end of the interview. He said, Governor, you got the greatest job on earth. And I said, Scott, I do, but I'm going to say something that's going to break your heart. I don't go to bed thinking about the children we saved. I go to bed weeping over the children we couldn't get to. And so we don't have enough money or access. We have to choose which children eat or don't eat. And Scott said, oh my God, I never thought about that. I said, well, Scott, we don't have a choice. So when people step up and give us the amount of money and the food we need, we can save lives. And it really takes a lot of pressure off of our people who have to make decisions of who eats and don't eat. So thank you so much for helping us get this message out. Very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. We're so honored. Again, we're so honored.
Thank you. Okay, great.